Greetings and salutations, friends and gamers of all stripes. My name is GM Dave. I am your man behind the screen, and today we are going to be discussing 5 great player habits and how they can go bad. Now, everybody wants to have good habits at the table when it comes to our tabletop role-playing games. Having those good habits established in ourselves not only makes the game run more smoothly, but all in all creates a better experience for everyone involved. So today, I'm going to cover 5 of the greatest player habits that can be developed, and also how too much of a good thing can cause those habits to sour. Now, I want to note before we go on that everything we're going to be discussing here is a matter of degrees. How far one of these habits has to go before it sours is going to depend entirely on your own personal preferences and the table itself. What does your group think about this? What do you, as the GM or one of the players, thinks about this? At what point do these habits start becoming a detriment as opposed to a benefit? Well, let's have a look, beginning with number 5 on the list, building flawed characters. Flawed characters are a fantastic thing to bring to the table, because not only do they bring a lot of great roleplay potential to yourself and your group, they also bring the potential for a lot of interesting mechanical things to work with. A flawed character that is properly handled is going to be someone who has 1 or 2 things about them that kind of hold them back a little bit. Whether it's mechanically or in the roleplay sense, these elements are going to give you as a player the opportunity to help your character grow as they learn to overcome their faults and their flaws and sort of shore themselves up in other areas so that way they can become a more rounded, more interesting character and enable you to bond more closely with your character. Not only this, having a character with a roleplay based or even mechanically based flaw, something that you can use in either aspect or preferably both, will allow your party members other ways to interact with you that'll be more interesting. It opens up the potential for more dramatic interaction. Same goes for your GM. A GM is much more easily able to work with a character who has some personal flaws than one who doesn't. Now, the flip side to this, you would think, would be building a character without any flaws, a character who is too perfect. But no. Remember, this is a matter of degrees. This is about a habit going too far. And what is the flip side of a flawed character? What is a flawed character that has gone too far? A broken character. Now, I'm not speaking about broken in terms of mechanically broken or mechanically overpowered. I am speaking about broken in the terms of these characters have so many flaws, so many things wrong with them, so many things holding them back that essentially they can't be played. Or even if they can be, they are so laser focused in 1 or 2 specific areas to the detriment of everything else that it ends up severely hurting not only them, but the party as a whole. Now, this is a habit that you will commonly see with power gamers and min-maxers when it comes to systems that involve mechanically based detriments that can be exchanged for benefits. Savage Worlds and Pathfinder are 2 that immediately come to mind in this sense. Pathfinder in particular has had a long-standing problem with this, and I have seen in first edition many players build characters that have a very strong laser focus in one specific style of play that very quickly grow bored with these characters once they realize that this one specific style of play, well, leaves them absolutely inept and a complete lump at everything else. They're only interacting the game through 1 or 2 angles. Well, you're going to get bored. And ultimately, it's going to end up dragging the party as a whole down. Now, depending on how extreme the instance is, it could literally drag your party down. I've had it happen before in the past where I've had people build characters for my games that had so many flaws that they essentially needed to be carried by the rest of the party. Yes, they had some powerful benefits in certain ways, but the frequency with which they were able to actually make use of those benefits, didn't come up nearly enough to warrant how much they had tanked their character. By 3 sessions in, this particular player was so frustrated, so tired of this character, as was everyone else in the party, that he just opted to throw the sheet away and create something new, bring a new character into the party. And that's the problem that you're going to face if you build a character that has too many flaws. Take it too far, and you're going to end up being frustrated, bored, and really just kind of end up kicking yourself because the way you designed your character wasn't conducive to actual gameplay. So what's the fix for this? Well, quite simply, gauge how far you're going and make sure you don't push it too far down the track. Make sure to leave yourself some options with your character outside of their core focus, so that way you can at least better get involved in other things and not feel like you're a complete limp noodle in those situations where your specialty isn't necessarily coming into play. Moving on from that, we go into number 4, great habit, relaxed gaming. Now, relaxed gaming can also be known as going with the flow. The great thing about a player who is willing to go with the flow is, well, they're willing to try just about anything. Any crazy idea that the GM comes up with, any sort of insane, ridiculous scenario they throw out there, a good go with the flow kind of player is going to look at it and say, hey, yeah, I'm willing to give this a shot. Why not? Let's just see what happens. And you know what? That sort of attitude creates some of the most fun gameplay moments, some of the greatest memories that you will ever experience in D&D, or any tabletop role-playing game for that matter. Going with the flow, being willing to take punches and roll with them, not fretting about how ridiculous something is, not getting lost in whether or not XYZ scenario feels a little too unfair or this or that. Just being willing to try something that's sort of unusual and play the game, basically, even if it is kind of absurd, well, it just opens you up to more willingness to accept things as fun as opposed to just pushing back against them. But what about when this goes too far? What do we get? Well, we get what I like to call lazy river riders. A lazy river rider is the kind of character, or the kind of player, excuse me, who is just easily distracted. They don't really end up paying attention to what's going on because they're just so relaxed, so nonchalant about everything that their investment and care for the game begins to dwindle. We've all experienced a lazy river rider at one point or another, and if you haven't yet, you probably will. The lazy river rider is essentially the easily distracted player, or the one who sits around at the table not paying attention while the other players are taking their turns. It's the kind of player who, in a combat, when their turn comes around, their reaction is to say, huh, what? Oh, yeah, I'm gonna attack that guy. Roll their dice. Oh, I missed. All right, cool. I'll move over here now. And then that's it. Or they're the type of player who, when their turn comes around, oh wait, what just happened? Sorry, I was looking something up on Facebook. Oh, I had to check out my Instagram. You know, sorry about that. I got a notification. I had to check it out. Notice what I mentioned there about checking notifications, checking social media, things like that. Phones, tablets, laptops for a lazy river rider, excuse me, are some of the worst things in their hands. Lazy river riders ultimately have grown so nonchalant about what's going on at the table that they no longer care about the game. And even though they don't necessarily intend it, this ends up being one of the most disrespectful things that anyone can do towards their GM and their fellow players. So, how do you fix the issue of a lazy river rider? Well, one thing you can do is you can start imposing some penalties on them when they're failing to pay attention. Make it known that, if they fail to pay attention, they're going to start paying the price a little bit in some way in game. Set up some scenarios that are going to directly impact them, sort of force them to put their attention back into the game. Furthermore, doing something as simple as disallowing the use of cell phones, laptops, and tablets at the table unless they can specifically show, oh hey, I'm using this to look up this specific thing about my character, this specific thing about the game, That's a great way to start helping them keep their focus where it needs to be. But more than anything, just talk to them. See if you can find out why it is they're not paying attention, because sometimes it just ends up being a situation where, hey, they're bored, they haven't really considered what they want out of the game, and they haven't really thought to voice it to you. So talk to them. Make sure that it's not a situation like that, and if it is, well, see what you can do to spice the game up a little bit for them to sort building their investment back in. Moving back on to the great habits now, we have number 3, and that is cautious play. Now, cautious play doesn't necessarily mean that you're not a player who goes in, kicks the door down, and starts swinging your axe around, killing everything in your path. Though, more often than not, you're not going to be that kind of player if you're a cautious player. Even the kick in the door type of player, though, can still play cautiously within that umbrella of play. Cautious play essentially means that you're going to take a little more time and care into the actions and decisions you make when it comes to playing your character in combat or while exploring a dungeon, etc., etc. You're going to put a little more thought into everything, and by doing this, you're going to naturally build more investment in your character because you're treating your character like they matter. That's really what the most beautiful part of cautious play is. It naturally builds investment into your character, and that investment can be infectious. That can lead to the rest of your party becoming a little bit more cautious, becoming a little bit more aware of the dangers in the game, and in so doing, you're also sort of building a sense of respect for the challenges that your GM is presenting you, which is only going to make them feel better about putting more interesting challenges before you. Really, it's a wonderful benefit. But just like all the benefits in this video, it can go too far. What do you get when cautious play goes too far? Get paranoid play. Paranoid play is one of the most frustrating things to deal with. And a paranoid player, well, they're the kind of player who frequently second guesses themselves. They take the concept of playing carefully and cautiously a little bit too far, and they start overthinking the challenges that are presented to them. When a player overthinks those challenges, well, their play slows considerably as they begin considering angle after angle that they can approach this with, second-guessing themselves, and losing themselves in circuitous thought loops that essentially leave them repeating the same handful of plans over and over with minor tweaks to try and figure out, well, maybe if I go this way, then this guy won't hit me. Oh, but there's this guy over here. You talk yourself into circles, and play slows to a snail's pace. Really, the solution here, just take a choice. Make some kind of an action. And if you don't, well, as a GM, if your player's having trouble making some kind of action, if they become paranoid like that and play starts to slow to a crawl, something simple like imposing a time limit on the turns can be a great way to fix this. Grab a little 2 or 3 minute hourglass, flip it over, you got 2 minutes to figure out what you're going to do. You got 1 minute to figure out what you're going to do. This will help keep the pace snappy, and this will help bring that player back into that snappy pace, and eventually it will break that sense of paranoia as they start to see that, hey, if I take a hit here or there, if things go a little bit wrong, it's not the end of the world. Hell, even if the character dies, it's not the end of the world. You can roll up a new character, build a more interesting character off that potentially. The point is, you don't want to get stuck in that loop of paranoia. You don't want to end up slowing down the game to a snail's pace, because not only are you hurting your own fun, you're also hurting the fun of everyone else, as they have to wait for you to make a decision. And unfortunately, just like with cautious play, the negative aspects of paranoid play are also infectious. So it's very careful to watch out for this. But playing off that infectious nature, let's move on to number 2 on the list. Team-oriented parties. A team-oriented group of players is essentially a group of cautious players who are working together. They're discussing with each other how they're going to approach scenarios in the game. By doing this, they're building a sense of camaraderie with each other, and they're building a sense of interaction and community, not only with themselves, but their characters. Team-oriented play is a beautiful thing to behold, because it not only enables the players to sort of think a little more tactically in the game, but it enables the players to interact with their characters on multiple levels. Team-oriented play doesn't just have to take place in combat or in a dungeon exploration scenario. It can also take place in a role-play scenario. Say, for instance, you're talking to the town constable because one of your players got caught stealing. The party rogue got caught picking the barkeep's pockets. And the constable, well, he's getting ready to throw him into prison. A team-oriented group can formulate a strategy to maybe even talk their way out of that. And if it's not successful, well, when things devolve to combat, they're already focusing on team-oriented play. They're going to start planning with each other naturally. It builds a social cohesion amongst the party that really can't be beat. It's a fantastic thing to behold, and I highly, highly recommend that everyone start getting involved in more team-focused parties whenever and wherever you can. And if you're still not convinced, well, consider this. The most wonderful thing about a team-oriented party is the simple fact that it allows everyone at the table to get a shot at that spotlight. Everyone ends up feeling good. Everyone ends up having more fun. And you uplift everyone at the table. It just makes everything more fun. Provided, of course, that yet again, it doesn't go too far. And what happens when a team-oriented party goes too far? You get an indecisive party. And an indecisive party, in many ways, is very similar to a paranoid player, just on the level of the entire group. The problem is, when you increase this level to the entire group, you don't run into the issue of the game slowing to a snail's pace. You run into the issue of it stopping completely dead. As strategies are discussed and rediscussed in a circuitous fashion, just like with a paranoid player, you end up doing nothing, as everyone's trying to figure out the perfect answer to a scenario, when really the solution would be to just do something, anything. Much more often than not, taking any kind of action is better than taking no action at all. So just do something. GMs, how can you fix this problem? Well, again, put a timer in place. Make it so that the players only have a limited amount of time at which they can act. Furthermore, you can impose some more penalties on their inability to take action. However, I will caution against this. If you start imposing penalties, forcing things to happen in their place, that can also cause an indecisive group to become dependent on you to make a choice for them. Because whether or not that choice ends up being better or worse than what they would have made, the fact is, hey, they didn't have to make the decision. You did it for them. So they will start to learn after a while that if they just wait long enough, well, the GM will do it for us. We won't have to worry about it anymore. So be very cautious if you take that approach to changing it. I would recommend using the hourglass approach and forcing some kind of decision out of your party that way. Finally, we reach number 1 on the list. The most useful, great player habit, in my opinion, the sharing of knowledge. A knowledgeable, experienced player is an absolutely wonderful thing to have at the table, especially if they are willing to share the knowledge that they've learned over the years. Not only can they be incredibly helpful in taking some of the burden off the GM, enabling them to focus a little bit more on actually designing the game that they're presenting to their players by taking some of the social burdens off of them, helping to sort of keep things under control, and taking on some of that burden of showing players that might not understand the game so well some of the things that they don't understand in your stead. They also just sort of build a sense of positivity among the group as they continue to teach the players useful things that they might not have previously known. But as with everything else here, there is a dark side. And what happens when you get the dark side of a player who's willing to share knowledge? You get a player who's willing to lord their knowledge over other people. This comes, generally speaking, in 2 varieties, both of which are pretty equally disdained amongst all tabletop RPGs. Those are rules lawyers and, as Seth Skorkowski puts them, negotiators, which are the types of people who will try to talk their way out of any negative situation any way they can. The problem with rules lawyers and negotiators is nothing to do with their knowledge ability. In fact, their knowledge ability can still be quite useful. The problem comes with how they present it. And more often than not, a rules lawyer and a negotiator is going to use their knowledge pretty strictly for their own benefit, and however it may detriment the table, well, that tends not to really matter much to them. In fact, rules lawyers in particular, but negotiators as well, have a really bad tendency to claim that their argumentative nature is to benefit the table, is to benefit the other players there, because, well, hey, I'm bringing up this point to our GM because, he's mistaken about this, and, if he does this right, it's only going to help us. Really, what they're looking for is to win an argument 9 times out of 10. Whether or not it actually benefits the party doesn't really matter to them because they're putting themselves before everyone else. And there's not really anything wrong with putting yourself before the rest of the party. Hear me out on this. Because you're playing your character. You should be invested in your character. Your character should come first for you. But they should not come first to the detriment of everybody else. If your character is coming first to the point that it's actually hurting the gameplay at the table, it's actually hurting the cohesion of the group and the fun of the other players and the GM, you're doing it wrong. Rules lawyers and negotiators have a bad tendency of doing exactly this. And they also have a bad tendency of being among the most disruptive players at the table because they are so obsessive so much of the time about being right, so obsessive about winning their arguments, that they're not willing to let what should be saved for an after-game discussion sit until after the game. Many, many times they will interrupt the flow of play to bring up a point or argue something that they disagree with. And really, it just ends up hurting everyone else at the table because what are you doing at this point? You're stopping play not to have a discussion on the rules, to have an argument about them. Stopping play to discuss something about the rules, generally speaking, is something you should try to avoid. But every now and then, it is going to happen. Something major enough is going to come up that you might have to stop play and say, hey, we got to hash this out now. Let's figure it out and get going again. Ideally, you want to do this quickly. The problem with rules lawyers and negotiators, the problem with players who lord their knowledge, are that you're not interested in doing it quickly. They're interested in doing it their way. And if you're not going to capitulate, they're going to argue with you. Now, oftentimes, you can argue them down. You can get them to back off, at least temporarily. But more often than not, at least in my experiences, when you get a player of this variety and the situation comes up again where they can argue their point, they're going to jump on the opportunity to argue their point. So how do you fix this? Well, primarily, you need to talk to this player. You need to make it clear that what they're doing is a detriment to the table, even if they argue against it. And ideally, you want to have the backing of your other players as well. The reason why you want to have the backing of the rest of the group is because more often than not, at least in my experiences, these types of players are the ones who are going to give the most pushback against your argument. They're going to be the ones who are the least receptive to changing. So you need to make it clear that this isn't just your opinion. Everyone else at the table feels the same way. And if they want to keep playing with this party, if they want to keep playing in this game, they're going to need to make that change and stop being so disruptive. Now, as a GM, when it comes to this, you need to be firm. You need to stand your ground. You cannot buckle in the face of their arguments against you. But don't be rude about it. Be polite, be to the point, Be firm, but be fair. If they have a good point, concede a good point. But make sure that when they bring up a good point, they're doing it properly. This isn't necessarily about the fact that they're right or wrong about something. It's about how they're approaching the situation. Being disruptive, even if you're correct ultimately, is only going to harm the table, and it's going to breed animosity amongst everyone there. Now, another thing to be aware of as a GM when dealing with a player like this is the very distinct possibility that they're not going to change. I've seen it happen quite a few times where a rules lawyer or negotiator type player will say, oh yeah, I get your point, I'm going to make this change. And for 2 or 3 sessions they do, but then they fall right back into their habits. So be willing to talk to them when it happens, but accept that there are going to be situations where they're going to fall back. And then accept that sometimes they are just not going to change. And you might need to ask them to leave the table. It's a rough thing, but it happens. Now, one fortunate thing is that there are plenty of times that I have seen where when a player is confronted like this and they're not willing to change, they will oftentimes excuse themselves from the table without necessarily saying anything about it, but they'll cut themselves off on their own. This is ultimately a good thing. It's unfortunate, but it is a good thing for the health of the game. When these players are aware of the fact that they can't change this habit, or more often they're just not willing to after they're called out, it's not uncommon for them to leave. So let them leave if that's what they want to do. Don't chase after a player who is ultimately being disruptive for your table. Remember, as unfortunate as it might be losing a player, it would be much more unfortunate to lose the entire game because 1 or 2 disruptive people aren't willing to change their ways and take the health of the table into consideration. So that's all I've got for you today, friends and gamers, on my 5 great player habits and how they can go bad. What are some other good player habits that you guys have seen turn sour? Let me know in the comments down below to carry on the discussion even further. If you like what I do and you'd like to see more videos of this type, please feel free to hit that subscribe button and that bell notification, and hit the like button if you enjoyed watching this. Comment down below with your thoughts. I'd love to carry on some more discussion about this topic, because really 5 tips, 5 habits that can go bad like this is barely scratching the surface. There are so many more we could talk about, and I would love to hear what your thoughts are. Open up that description box down below to follow me on social media. You can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Minds, and Gab for regular notifications of when my videos go live. Minds.com, however, is the best platform to follow me on if you'd like to actually get in contact with me and discuss things with me directly. Furthermore, you can follow me on BitChute as well. Almost all of my videos are mirrored over there except for the very long-form content like live streams. I am working on getting those uploaded over there, but for the time being, currently it appears that BitChute cannot actually mirror those things automatically on its own, so it's something I'm going to have to do manually for the time being. And with that now said and done, friends and gamers of all stripes, as usual, my name is GM Dave. I am your man behind the screen, and it is my sincere hope that you continue to roll high, or play well, and game on.